Welcome to How to Play Yu-Gi-Oh! In this series, we're going to be going over the basics of Yu-Gi-Oh! Of how to play and what you need to get started, all the way to competitive play. In this episode, we are going to be going over the things you need to duel as well as the field zone. So things you need to get started. What you're going to need to duel is you're going to need a deck. A deck consists of 40 to 60 cards, and you can only control 3 of the same card name for main deck, extra deck, as well as side deck. Some cards are, banned, semi-limited, or limited. We'll get over that when we get into the cards sections. Try to keep your card closest to 40 cards because you want to be able to see the card more consistently that you want to be able to see. So for example, we're playing a Blue Eyes deck. We're going to be wanting to play 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons because we're going to want to see this card more often. So now that we have the main deck covered, we're going to be going over the extra deck. The extra deck is a 0 to 15 card deck, which contains XYZ monsters, Synchro monsters, Fusion monsters, as well as Link monsters. The rules for the extra card is the same as the main deck. You can only control 3 of the same cards, and some cards are also limited, banned, as well as semi-limited. They do not count towards the 40 card deck, so you have 40 as well as your 15 extra deck, which is pretty standard. You can also have a side deck. A side deck is 0 to 15 cards, which you can change during your matches. So game 2 and 3 during a match, but we'll get over that during the matches. It does not count towards your 40 as well. Additional items you may need. You're going to most likely need a deck box. A deck box is what you control, or is what you can hold all your cards in, as well as store some dice and stuff like this. Other stuff you'll need. So this is a pretty basic deck box. It's from Ultra Pro. It can hold, 100 cards. No area for sleeves or nothing like that, but it's extremely cheap. I think it's like $3.99. Great for a starting point. We can then move up to higher deck boxes. This is personally the one I use. It's called Dragon Shield Tower. So it opens up and it has room for your 100 cards as well as a dice area. Yeah, I like it because it's tall and stuff like that, but it's quite more expensive. Now to go over the next thing we're going to need. We're going to need dice. So dice is to put on counters. So let's say you have a card as a counter, you can put a dice on it. Or if you're gonna roll to go first, you can roll double dice. You see that in a lot of our other duels. It's just to dedicate chances and stuff like that. You're also going to need a monster token. For this series, we're going to be using the Millennium Eye token, or I've created. It does not have to be a Konami token as well as one that you made. It can be anything else. It could be a Pokemon card. It could be really anything to dedicate that it's a token. It cannot be a monster card or a spell card because you do not want to, make it so that your opponent gets confused. You also can use a field center, which will dedicate the differences between the centers. So your opponent's board as well as your board. And if you do not have these zones on your thing, it can show you where the center of the field is. So you can put the extra monster zones on both sides. We're just gonna leave that there as well as this here. And for the most important part, cards are expensive. You don't want to, damage your cards while you play or as you shuffle, so it's extremely important to use card sleeves. These are my choices. I like Dragon Shield personally. If you're going to buy Dragon Shield, you have to buy the Japanese size or else they won't fit for your cards. But yeah, Ultra Pro is a really good example as well. We are going to be using the Ultra Pro Light Blues here for our deck for the series. It's a really basic deck. Sleeve. They're $2.99. For 60, not bad at all, compared to these, which are $8.99, so quite more expensive, but they last for longer. Now that we have everything you need before you start dueling, we're going to be going over what else you could use. You can also use what we call Yugioh Neuron. So Yugioh Neuron is an app which does have dice as well as counters, tools that you can use. You can check the logs as well as take life points. So for example, if we take 500 life points, we can do this and just keep track of the life points as well as a timer. And you could look up cards even. So it's really quite useful. I wish we had this back when I first started, but we're glad we have it now. So it's important to know before you start a duel that both players start with 8,000 life points. So some cards will make you pay life points as well as, you'll take damage, depending. And when your life points hit the 0, you lose the game. Other ways of losing the game is if there's a card effect that states you lose the game, or as well as if you draw for turn and there's no cards that you can draw. So let's say we have our 40 card deck. You start off with 5 cards, and then we keep going until we have no cards in our deck. The person who has no cards in their deck and they have to draw for turn loses the game. So this is the game mat. This is our field over here. So to start off the game, we're going to be looking at, what is our field. So here we have the main monster zones. This is where you're going to primarily summon your monsters from your main deck. And then we here have the spell and trap card zone. This is where you're going to be playing spells and traps from your main deck onto the field, as well as your trap cards from your deck. You have any option between all these, but if it's already occupied, you cannot occupy it again. This is the graveyard. So any card that goes off the field or from your hand and it says go to the graveyard, it will go to the graveyard, which is also represented as GY in some card text. Your deck here is where your deck is going to be placed. So for example, we are playing our Blue Eyes deck. We are going to place it face down like this. You don't want so that your opponent can see the card, and you do not know what the top deck of your card is, so you have to keep it random at all times. Over here is our extra deck, which we will place here. It also has to be face down unless otherwise stated, which we'll talk about later in another episode involving pendulum monsters. This is where all your monsters are going to be going from the, if they're XYZ, Synchro, or Link. So they go face down is here as well. Here is your spell zone, your field zone. So you can play a spell card, which we'll go over in the spell section, but a spell card which has this logo here is called a field card. So you're able to play it in the field zone. You can also set it in the field zone as well, but we'll get over that later, and it stays there. This is your extra monster zones. You can choose one or the other to use. Let's say we summon one, we'll use Link Kuriboh here, and then we want to use this as well. You can also choose to do that one, but you cannot occupy both at the same times, other than in certain instances, which we will go over in a future episode. It's important to note that, these are for your monster zones as well. So, you can summon some of your extra deck monsters as well in these zones. We'll get over that when we go over each card type. Now that we understand the basics of the zones, we are going to be going over what a card is. So this is a monster card. It's important to note that, how to read a card. So all cards have text or something that they can do, and they all indicate stuff. The most important part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to read your cards. That is rule number 1. So how to read a card. Alexandrite Dragon is the name of this card. You can only find it during this box right here, which will indicate what the card name is. This over here is the attribute, so we can see that this card here is a light type. And then we look at the levels, so it's a level 4 monster. We'll go over what all this means in another episode when we go over monster cards. We're just going to show you what a card is. So here's a card description. If it does not have an effect, it's going to tell you a little text here. We're not going to read that text because it doesn't do anything for us, but it's just a little cool tidbit. There's going to be here, it's going to be the set number. So you can look this up where you can obtain these cards. And this is going to be the type. So this here is a type, it is a dragon type. It's important to note that, when we go over the type section and what monster cards do, that's important to know. So dragon is a type and attribute is a light. Well, some of the most important parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to be the attack and defense. So right here, we see attack 2000, defense 100. It's important to note what these cards do, and this is a normal monster. It does not have an effect. Then we're going to go over what an effect monster is in the monster sections. This is an effect monster. It is a spellcaster for its type, and it's an effect monster, so instead of having this text of dedicating what the card, is, it has an effect. So it says when this card is normal summoned, you can add one level 1 or light tuner monster, which is another type of card. So it can be multiple types, a spellcaster, tuner. So we'll get over that when we go over what monsters are, but it can be more than one. Here, you can add one. You can discard this card, then target one effect monster you control which says right here, an effect monster, sent to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 Blue Eyes from your deck. You can only use this effect of Sage of Eyes of Blue once per turn. So now that we know that what an effect monster and a non-effect monster is, we're able to go over what cards are. So there's many different types of effects. There is a continuous effect, ignition effect, quick effect, and trigger effect. A trigger effect includes a flip summon, but we will go over that when we go over monster cards. An ignition effect. You can use this type of effect by declaring its activation during your main phase. We will go over what phases are after we go over this. There are sub-ignition effects that you have to have a cost to activate, like discarding a card from your hand, which we saw with Sage of Eyes of Blue, tributing a monster, or paying life points. Because you can choose to activate is a type of effect, it's easy to create combos with them. So Sage of Eyes of Blue, for example. You can read the card here, and it says you can discard this card, semicolon. Then target 1. So we can see here that discard this card is the cost. And then the effect will resolve afterwards. So what is an ignition effect? A trigger effect is some effects that are activated at specific times, such as during the standby phase or when this monster is destroyed. These cards can make for some great combos, but it's easier for your opponent to predict when they will happen, so they might try to stop you. It's important that you not only read your cards, but you also read your opponent's cards, because that will tell you what they are doing. Quick effect. There are special monsters effects that you can activate even during your opponent's turns. These type of effects have a spell speed of 2, which we'll go over later during spell speed, even though other monster effects have a spell speed of 1. We'll go over that once again during the spell speed. Since it's difficult for your opponent to predict these cards, they can give you an unexpected surprise. So you will normally see the word quick effect in parentheses when a quick effect is going to be declared, which we'll go over with Sky Striker Ray. So it's here you can see it says the word quick effect, and then it says you contribute this card, plus summon 1 Sky Striker Ace monster from your extra deck. We're not going to go over what this card does, but just an example of what quick effect means. So you can use that during your opponent's turn. Flip effects. Flip effects is part of the trigger effects. So it's when a monster is face down, we'll use, for example, we can use a Shaddoll monster. Just gonna get out a Shaddoll monster right here. Let's use Wendy for example, from our From Scratch series. So Wendy here is a psychic type flip effect monster. So it says flip, which you can see right here. You can special summon 1 Shaddoll monster from your deck, face down or face up defense position, except itself. So if this card is set face down, which we'll go over with monsters, and it gets either battled or, flip face up somehow, its effect will activate, which will special summon 1 from your deck, face down or face up. Now that we know what monster cards are, we're going to have to go over that in the future episode. So now that we got the base down, we're going to go over phases. So there's multiple phases in the game. There is the draw phase. So during the draw phase, a player who is a turn player draws 1 card from their deck. You do not start the duel by drawing 1 card. So let's say you are going first. You start in the draw phase, but you do not draw a card. A player with no cards in their deck is unable to draw or loses the duel. After the draw, trap cards or quick play spell cards, which we'll go over in the spell section, can be activated before proceeding the standby phase. So after you go draw phase, you then proceed to the standby phase. The standby phase, some effects can activate, or a cost you must pay in the standby phase. You do not have any of these cards on the field. You can still activate trap or quick play cards before moving to this main phase 1. So let's say, for example, we have a card like Basil Rose Shoot. Basil Rose Shoot is a quick play spell we will go over in the spell cards. We can it goes draw phase. We then say that to our opponent. If they have no effects, we then move to our standby phase. So we'll say the word standby phase. And then if we have an effect we can activate, which we could activate Basil Rose Shoot, not in this distance because we do not have a card, to use from Basil Rose Shoot. But we could activate this card because it is a quick effect. If there is no effects during the standby phase, you then say main phase. So in main phase 1, this is when your player plays most of your cards. You can normal summon, set, or change the battle position of a monster activate a card or effect, or set spell and trap cards. These actions can be done in any order you want, but some actions have restrictions. So possible actions in this phase: normal summoning or setting a monster. There's no limit of the number of times you can flip or special summon during a turn, but you can only normal summon or set a monster, including a tribute summon, which we'll go over in the monster section, once per turn. Change your monster's battle positions. This includes flip summoning a monster or changing the positions of a face-up monster to face-up attack or defense. You can change the position of each monster you control, except in 3 cases. You cannot change the battle position of a monster that was placed onto the field this turn. You cannot change it in main phase 2 if the monster attacked during the battle phase. You cannot change this card if you've already changed its battle position once this turn. You can activate a card or effect. You can activate a spell or trap card and the effects of spell and trap cards or effect monsters as many times as you want during this phase, as long as you keep paying any costs involved. Set spell or trap cards. You can set spell or trap cards face down in your spell and trap card zone during the phase as long as you have space. It's important to know that you cannot activate trap cards the turn they are set. You cannot just play them onto the field as well. We'll go over that during the trap section. So battle phase. Now it's time to battle with your monster cards. This phase is divided into many steps. This step here is going to be skipped. Just know that the battle phase is something very, very complicated, and we are going to be going over that after we go over monster effects as well as many other things. It is probably the most complicated phase of the whole game because there's many different steps. So just know that you know battle phase. After the battle phase, there's main phase 2. If you conducted your battle phase, your turn moves to main phase 2 afterwards. The actions players can perform are the same as in main phase 1. However, the players that already did something in main phase 1 that has a limit to the number of times it can be done, the player cannot do it again in main phase 2. Consider if you want to activate set spell or trap cards or summon or set a monster if you didn't do that during the main phase 1, based on your situation after the battle phase. Use this phase to prepare for your opponent's turns. So it's important to note that, during turn 1, where you go first, you do not draw a card, and you cannot conduct your battle phase, which means you cannot conduct your main phase 2. After main phase 2, you can go to end phase. So end phase is the announcement of your end of the turn, and if there's any card to say during the end phase in their text, resolve those effects in this phase. If you have more than 6 cards in your hand at the end of the turn, select the discard cards to the graveyard until you only have 6 cards in your hands. So now that we understand the basics of what the field does and how to play the game, that's going to be the conclusion of this episode. If there's anything you are not understanding, please leave them down in the comment section below, and stay tuned because we're going to be going over in the next episode what we can do with monster cards and how to start Duel. Anyways, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.